That hot Montana sun was beating down something fierce on Lillian Foster as she stood all by herself on the dusty old train platform. Her trunk and three little bags were set right beside her, looking like faithful guards. A long 3 hours had ticked by since that train pulled away, leaving her high and dry in Promise Creek, a town whose name felt like a cruel joke. Can you imagine being treated so poorly? Her hand, in its fancy ivory glove, was shaken as she looked at her pocket watch again. It felt like the ticking was getting louder with every minute that crawled by. The fella who promised to marry her, a man named Mr. Ethan Wallace, was simply nowhere to be found. It was the year 1883, and at just 22 years old, Lillian had come more than 1,000 miles all the way from Boston to meet a husband she only knew from 6 months of letters. She tried to smooth out her navy blue traveling dress, which was all wrinkled and covered in dust from the long trip, and she fought hard to hold back the tears that were welling up in her eyes. She told herself she would not cry, not right here, not in front of all these strangers who would glance over at her with pure pity in their eyes. A voice called out, "Ma'am, you've been standing right there since about noon," said the station master. He was an older gentleman with kind eyes that crinkled up at the corners when he smiled. "Nightfall is coming on soon. Maybe I can point you toward the boarding house." Lillian had to swallow her pride. My fiancé was supposed to meet me here. Mr. Wallace, I suppose you might know him." Well, the station master's whole face changed, and Lillian felt her heart drop right into her stomach before he even said a word. "Wallace? You mean Ethan Wallace?" He took off his cap and started twisting it in his hands. "Ma'am, I'm mighty afraid there's been a terrible misunderstanding. You see, Mr. Wallace, he left this town more than a month ago. He just packed his things and lit out for California after he struck it rich in the silver mines." It felt like the whole world was spinning right under Lillian's feet. Every single thing she had planned and everything she had given up just fell to pieces in that one single moment. She could just picture her parents' faces, full of disapproval. They had warned her not to answer one of those mail-order bride ads, and they begged her to just accept the offer from that old widowed banker who was 3 times her age. But Lillian, she had wanted a real adventure and love, and a fresh start out here in this wide-open country. And look at her now, standing all alone 1,000 miles from home, with hardly enough money for a ticket back, much less a place to stay and food to eat while she waited for the next train heading east. Train. That station master was still talking a blue streak. Something about the boarding house having a room, but his voice just kind of faded away as Lillian spotted a tall fella heading her way from the far end of the platform. The setting sun threw his shadow long and dark, broad in the shoulders, and walking like he owned the place, with a cowboy hat pulled down low over his eyes. As he got nearer, Lillian could start to make out his face, a strong jaw with a few days' worth of whiskers, and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right into her soul, and a mouth that crooked up just a bit at one corner. He was dressed in the practical clothes of a working man, a faded blue shirt, some well-worn denim pants, and dusty boots. Not the kind of duds a successful businessman like Mr. Wallace claimed to be would wear. The stranger stopped a few feet short of her, his eyes going from Lillian to her bags and back again. Then, with a slow, easy smile that changed his whole weathered face, he spoke. "You must be waiting on me." It was not a question, more like he was just stating a fact. Before Lillian could get a word out, he kept on. "I am mighty sorry for the delay. Had a little trouble with the wagon." He tipped the brim of his hat in a polite kind of way. "Name's Luke Garrett. I own the Double Circle Ranch about 10 miles out of town." Lillian just blinked, her mind all jumbled up for a second, pushing aside her worry. "Sir, I do believe you have got the wrong person. I was waiting for someone else." "Wallace?" he said, nodding his head. "I figured as much. This whole town knows by now that Ethan Wallace is a no-account scoundrel who has left another poor girl high and dry." His whole face softened up then. "You are not the first one, ma'am." Humiliation washed over Lillian, hot as a branding iron. Not the first. Those words just echoed in her head, like salt in a fresh wound. "Mr. Garrett," she started, pulling herself up straight and mustering every bit of dignity she had left. "I appreciate your concern, but I surely do not need your pity." I will just be heading back to Boston on the very next train." Luke Garrett looked her over for a long moment, then just slowly shook his head. "Next train heading east will not be through here for 2 whole weeks." He glanced up at the darkening sky. "And you're going to need a roof over your head tonight. The boarding house is full up. It's the trail drive. Brought in a whole mess of cowboys, more than usual. So I'm offering you a job, Miss Foster." Lillian Foster. She paused for a moment, a little suspicion clouding up her mind. "What sort of job?" "My housekeeper up and left last month to get hitched. The whole place is in need of a woman's touch, and I sure could use the help with the cooking and all." He must have seen just how bone-tired she looked in her eyes, because he was quick to add, "You'll have your own quarters, of course, and I will pay you a fair wage. Enough to buy your ticket back home in a couple of weeks, if that's still what you're set on." Lillian considered her options, and Lord knows there were not many. She could take charity from folks in town, or spend nearly every last dime she had on that boarding house if a room ever opened up. Or she could take this offer from a man who, though he looked a little rough around the edges, had kind eyes and spoke to her with real respect. "Why would you help me, Mr. Garrett?" "You do not know me from Adam." For the first time, he looked a bit uneasy. "Let's just say I know what it feels like to be left waiting for somebody who never shows up." He nodded toward her trunk. "So what do you say, Miss Foster? The job is yours if you want it." Right then and there, looking into the face of this stranger who was not offering pity, but a real opportunity, Lillian made up her mind. She would take his offer, earn her way back home, and return to Boston with her head held high. This little detour in her plans would just be a short, forgettable chapter in her life story. "I accept your offer, Mr. Garrett, but only until I have earned enough for my ticket home." Luke's smile spread clear across his face, changing his whole expression. "Fair enough." He bent down to lift her heavy trunk. "My wagon is just around the corner. We had best get a move on before the sun goes down. That mountain trail can be mighty tricky after dark." As Lillian followed him, she could not help but wonder if she was making another terrible mistake. But there was something about Luke Garrett's steady way and his straightforward manner that made her feel, for the first time since she had stepped off that train, that maybe everything was going to be all right after all. The long wagon ride to the Double Circle Ranch was quiet for the most part. Lillian sat up on that wooden wagon seat, holding on for dear life as they made their way through the rough country. Luke Garrett handled those reins with the easy confidence of a fella who had traveled this path more times than he could count, now and then pointing out a landmark or saying a little something about the land. "That creek over yonder runs all year, even when it is bone dry," he said, nodding toward a little ribbon of water shining in the last light. "Makes this piece of land worth more than most." Lillian just nodded politely, though her mind was a million miles away, still trying to wrap her head around the terrible way her careful plans had all fallen apart. The cool night air smelled of pine and sagebrush, a world away from the cold smoke and salty sea air of Boston. Even with everything going on, she could not help but take in the wild beauty of the place, with the sun casting long shadows across the rolling hills. "It truly is beautiful," she admitted, finally breaking a long stretch of silence. Luke glanced over at her, a look of clear surprise on his face. "Most ladies from back east do not see it that way. Say it is too wild, too empty." "Well, maybe I am not like most ladies from back east," Lillian replied, and then felt a little silly for how proud that sounded. But Luke did not seem to mind one bit. If anything, the corner of his mouth twitched up into a small smile. "I can see that," he agreed, his voice giving nothing away. "Most would not take a job from a complete stranger either." "Sometimes a person does not have a choice, Mr. Garrett." "It is Luke," he corrected her. "If you are going to be living on my ranch, you might as well call me by my first name." Lillian paused for a moment. That kind of familiarity between a man and a woman who were not married would be quite the scandal back in Boston, but she figured the rules were different out here in the Montana Territory. "All right then, Luke, and you can call me Lillian." They came over the top of a hill, and Luke pulled the wagon to a halt. There she is, the Double Circle. Down below them, tucked into a valley and sheltered by gentle hills, was a whole spread of building. The main house was a good bit bigger than Lillian had been expecting. A 2-story place built from stout logs with a wide porch that wrapped clean around the front. A few outbuildings, a big barn, and a corral made up the rest of the homestead. Off in the distance, she could see cattle grazing in the last light of the evening. "It is quite a place," she said, and she truly meant it. Lillian was truly impressed. "How long have you been out here?" she asked. 7 years, Luke answered, with a gentle flick of the reins to get the horses walking again. "I came here with not much more than the clothes on my back after the war. I worked as a hired hand on other folks' ranches, saved every last cent, and bought this piece of land when nobody else would touch it." "Why on earth not?" Lillian wondered. "Too far from town, and a little too close to Blackfoot country," he said with a shrug. "But the Blackfoot and we have an understanding. And truth be told, the quiet suits me just fine." As the wagon rolled closer, Lillian started to see the smaller details. A thin ribbon of smoke was rising from the stone chimney, a vegetable patch was off to one side, and chickens were scratching around in a fenced-in yard. It looked like a real honest-to-goodness home. When they finally pulled into the yard, a young man came hurrying out from the barn to help with the team. Luke hopped down from the wagon seat and walked around to offer Lillian his hand. "This here is Tommy, my ranch hand," he said while she placed her gloved hand in his rough palm and stepped down carefully. "Tommy, this is Miss Foster. She'll be taking on the housekeeping duties from now on." Tommy, who could not have been a day over 16, gave a respectful nod. "Ma'am." His eyes, full of curiosity, shifted between her and Luke. You could tell he was wondering about her story, but he was too well-mannered to ask. "Let me show you to your room," Luke said, lifting her trunk out of the wagon bed like it was filled with feathers. "Tommy, if you would, please bring Miss Foster's other bags." Lillian followed Luke up the porch steps and right on into the house. The inside was warmer and more welcoming than she ever expected. It was a big main room with a grand stone fireplace, furniture that looked comfortable, and even bookshelves, all filled up with books. Lillian could not stop herself from raising her eyebrows at such a surprising sight out here. "My mother was a school teacher," Luke explained, seeing where she was looking. "Reading was not a choice in our house." He then led her on a small tour of the main floor, showing her the kitchen, the dining area, and his office before they went up a sturdy-looking staircase. "We have 4 bedrooms upstairs," he explained. "Mine is down at the end of the hall. This one right here will be yours." He pushed open a door to show a very pleasant room with a brass bed, a nice dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. "Oh, it's just lovely," Lillian said, truly pleased with what she saw. Living quarters. She'd been half expecting to be put up in some little old plain room, the kind fit for a hired hand. "This was my sister's room back when she lived here," Luke said, setting her trunk down. "She went and married a store owner in town about 2 years back." Tommy showed up with the rest of her bags, placing them real careful-like by the door. "Need anything else, boss?" "That'll do, Tommy. Appreciate it." Once the young fella left, Luke turned back to Lillian. "Well, I'll let you get settled in. Supper will be ready in about an hour. Nothing fancy tonight, I'm afraid. Just some stew I got simmering from this morning. You know how to cook?" Lillian just couldn't hide the surprise in her voice. Luke's mouth twitched into that little half-smile of his again. "Had to learn after Mrs. Winters took off." "I'm no fancy cook, but we ain't starved yet." He started for the door. "The washroom's down at the end of the hall if you want to freshen up. Take your time." When he had gone, Lillian just sank down on the edge of the bed, finally letting herself be truly honest for a moment. She was bone-tired, heartbroken, and scared to death. Tears started welling up in her eyes as the whole heavy truth of her situation came crashing down on her. She had bet everything on the promises of Ethan Wallace, and she had lost it all. But as she looked around that clean, comfortable room, so different from what she'd been expecting when she took Luke's offer, a little spark of grit started to burn inside her. She would work hard, earn her way back home, and put this shameful time behind her. And maybe, just maybe, she would learn something worthwhile from this unexpected turn in her carefully planned life. With a fresh bit of resolve, Lillian stood up and started to unpack the few things she would need for her 2-week stay at the Double Circle Ranch. By the time Lillian came on down the stairs, she had pulled herself together, changed into a simple dress made of forest green cotton, and pinned her chestnut hair up into a neat bun. The smell of beef stew and fresh baked bread led her to the kitchen, And that's where she found Luke, stirring a big old pot on the cast iron stove. He looked up when she walked in, his eyes quickly taking in her different look before he went back to his stirring. Feeling better? Much better, thank you. Lillian stepped a little closer, naturally sizing up the kitchen, which was a real nice kitchen with a big work table in the middle, and open shelves filled with all sorts of supplies, and a pantry I could see through a half-open door. Can I give you a hand with anything? The table's already set. Luke nodded toward the dining room next door. But you could slice that bread if you would like. He pointed to a golden brown loaf cooling there on the counter. Lillian found a knife and began to carefully cut the bread, surprised by how good it looked. Did you bake this as well? A real, genuine smile spread across Luke's face. No, that is from Mrs. Gunderson at the Mercantile. She sends bread out with Tommy whenever he makes a trip to town for supplies. He then moved the stew into a large serving bowl. I can handle most things, but baking is just beyond me. I enjoy baking, Lillian offered. It was one of the few household chores my mother insisted I learn, despite all her modern ideas on a woman's education. Luke raised an eyebrow. So you are educated then? I attended Miss Porter's school back in Connecticut. Lillian arranged the slices of bread in a basket. My father believed that women should be prepared to support themselves if it was necessary, though he certainly never imagined a situation quite like this one. Luke carried the stew to the dining room, and Lillian followed right behind with the bread. The table was indeed set simply, but it was done correctly, with two places set kitty-corner from each other, not at opposite ends. A bottle of wine and 2 glasses stood ready, along with a pitcher of water. Your father sounds like a very sensible man, Luke commented as he held her chair for her. Lillian settled in, touched by the kind gesture. He is. He will be devastated when he learns what has happened. She looked down at her lap, suddenly feeling overwhelmed again by the thought of her family's reaction to her terrible situation. You do not have to tell them everything, Luke suggested while taking his seat. In your letters, I mean, you could just say the arrangement did not suit you and you will be returning home. Lillian thought about this as she accepted the bowl of stew he passed to her. The idea of hiding the full, humiliating truth was tempting, but no, not even when it would be so much easier. Honesty is usually best in the long run, Luke agreed, pouring some wine into her glass. But sometimes kindness means sparing each other any more hurt. Their conversation just flowed as natural as a cool breeze. All through supper, Luke asked some real considerate questions about her long journey out west, her folks back in Boston, and her schooling, being mighty careful to steer clear of the painful business with Ethan Wallace. In turn, Lillian learned that Luke had grown up way out in Pennsylvania and fought for the Union in the war, even though he was just a young fella, and then headed west right after, saying he just could not settle back into his old life. The war, well, it changes a man, he said plain as day. I needed wide open country after all that. And your family? Lillian asked. You mentioned your sister and your mother. My mother passed on about 5 years back. My father, even before that. My sister Lydia is the only close kin I have left. She and her husband are expecting their first little one any day now. You could hear the pride in his voice. I reckon I'll be an uncle come Christmas, if the good Lord's willing. Once they had finished eating, Luke laid out exactly what her chores would be. Cooking the meals, tidying up the main rooms of the house, washing the linens, and lending a hand out in the vegetable patch. It is not too much to handle, he assured her. I do not expect things to be perfect. Just a good, honest day's work. And the pay? Lillian asked, getting right to the point. $5 a week, plus your room and board, Luke answered right away without a second thought. That is what I paid Mrs. Winters. It ought to be plenty for your ticket back home in 2 weeks, with a little something left over. Lillian nodded her head, feeling the deal was fair. She was satisfied with the arrangement. I will get started first thing in the morning. Later that night, getting ready for bed in that comfortable room, Lillian thought about the strange and crooked path her life had just taken. Instead of spending her first night in Montana as a brand new bride, here she was, working for a man living all by himself. But even with all that had happened, she felt a strange kind of peace settle over her. Luke Garrett was not at all what she had pictured a man from the West to be. He was well-schooled, a true gentleman, and he treated her with kindness and respect. This is only for a little while, she told herself as she slid under the warm quilt. Just 2 weeks, and then I will be heading back to Boston, a whole lot smarter and more careful, but with my pride still in one piece. And with that comforting thought, Lillian drifted off into a deep sleep, worn out from it all. She woke up to the sounds of folks moving around downstairs. She could hear men talking, the clatter of plates, and that old screen door swinging open and shut. The morning sun was pouring through her window when Lillian realized, a little red-faced, that she had slept in. She quickly got herself dressed in a sensible brown skirt and a clean white blouse, pinned her hair up, and hustled on downstairs. The kitchen was quiet, but you could tell breakfast had already happened. Dirty plates were in the sink, coffee was still in the pie, and a platter of biscuits, about half gone, sat on the table. Looking out the window, she could see Luke and Tommy down in the corral, working with the horses. Lillian got right to it, starting with washing the dishes, scrubbing the table, and taking a look to see what all was in the pantry. By the middle of the morning, she had the kitchen shining and a list made of all the supplies they needed, and she'd even started some bread dough for supper. She was just wondering what to fix for lunch when the screen door creaked open, and in walked Luke, bringing the smell of sunshine, leather, and horses with him. "Looks like you've been busy," he said, glancing around the now spotless kitchen. "I'm mighty sorry for sleeping so late," Lillian started to say, but Luke just waved it off. "You needed the rest. Besides, Tommy and I got breakfast handled just fine." He poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot she had kept warm on the stove. "What are you planning for the day?" "Well, I figured I'd fix a proper lunch and supper, finish up that bread I started, and maybe get to work on the parlor this afternoon." Luke gave a nod of approval. "Sounds like a good plan. Tommy and I will be working with them new horses for most of the day." He paused for a second, then added, "If you get a chance, there's a mending basket over by my chair in the parlor. It ain't nothing urgent, but Mrs. Winters was the one who usually took care of it." "Of course," Lillian agreed. "Is there anything in particular y'all would like for the meals?" "Whatever you can find in the pantry is fine by me." He finished off his coffee. "I'm not a picky man, and that boy Tommy will eat anything that doesn't try to eat him first." With a quick grin, he headed back outside, leaving Lillian to get on with her work. The day flew by as Lillian settled right into the rhythm of the household. She fixed a big lunch of ham sandwiches and potato salad, which the men ate up with plenty of kind words. The afternoon was spent tidying up the parlor and mending shirts and socks, chores that felt familiar and almost comforting. And it was a comforting kind of work. By evening, the whole house smelled of fresh baked bread and the beef and vegetable pie she'd fixed up for supper. "Well, this is the best meal I've had in months," Tommy said with a full mouth, reaching for a second helping. That young ranch hand had been a little bashful around Lillian, but his shyness just melted away with some good cooking. Luke nodded his head, agreeing. "You're a mighty fine cook, Lillian. Thank you kindly. I'm just glad you all are enjoying it." Lillian felt a warm feeling of satisfaction that took her by surprise. She had never much cared for housework back in Boston, always seen it as just another chore. But out here, there was something truly rewarding about bringing a little order and comfort to this home. As the next few days went on, Lillian settled right into a routine. She'd get up early to make breakfast, spend her mornings cooking and cleaning, and then use her afternoons for the laundry, mending clothes, or tending to the little vegetable garden. Now, Luke and Tommy were usually busy with ranch work, but they always came together for meals, and the conversation just flowed easy between them. Lillian started learning more about how the ranch was run, about the cattle that paid the bills, and the horses that Luke bred and trained on the side. She learned about the challenges of making a life in such a remote place. And Luke, for his part, seemed truly interested in her stories about high society in Boston, her schooling, and her family's shipping business. By the time her first week at the Double Circle was over, Lillian was surprised to realize she wasn't thinking about going back to Boston all the time anymore. The sting of what Ethan Wallace did had faded to a dull ache, replaced by the good feeling of days full of honest work and evenings spent in friendly conversation. Then one Sunday morning, Luke came to breakfast all dressed up in his Sunday best, a dark suit that really showed the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his body. We usually head into town for a church service, he explained. Would you care to come along with us? It might be good for you to meet some of the local folks. But Lillian hesitated. The thought of facing all those curious stares from the whole town was an awful lot. By now, everyone surely knew her story. The mail-order bride who got left behind and taken in by the bachelor rancher. It was like Luke could read her mind, plain as day. Now, you don't have to go if you're not feeling up to it. No, I'd like that, Lillian decided. Just give me a few minutes to get ready. She picked out her Sunday best, a pretty blue dress with white lace at the collar and cuffs, and put her hair up more carefully than she had all week. When she came down the stairs, Luke's warm glance gave her a funny little flip in her stomach, a feeling she quickly pushed away. The wagon ride into town was real pleasant, with Tommy chattering away about the big 4th of July party, and Luke now and then pointing out how the land had changed since she first got there. Promise Creek sure looked different in that bright Sunday morning sun. A small but busy little community with a church, a schoolhouse, a general store, a bank, and several other businesses all lined up on its main street. As Luke helped Lillian down from the wagon in front of the white church, she took a deep breath, preparing herself for all the staring she knew was about to happen. And sure enough, heads turned the second they walked inside, and little whispers followed right behind them. "Don't you pay them any mind," Luke murmured, leading her to a pew with a gentle hand on her arm. Folks in a small town love to talk, but deep down, they're good people. The church service was simple, but it truly lifted your spirits. The preacher's sermon was all about kindness and giving folks a second chance. Afterwards, when everyone was milling around on the church steps, Lillian found herself in a circle of curious but friendly-looking faces. Luke went around making introductions, and before she knew it, she was chatting with a few of the town's ladies. "We're getting together for a quilting bee on Tuesday," offered Mrs. Gunderson, who was the baker's wife. "We'd be mighty pleased if you'd come." "Luke tells us you're a real good cook," another woman chimed in, saying her name was Lydia Parker. It was Luke's sister, Lillian realized with a little jolt of surprise. "We could surely use an extra hand with the committee planning the big 4th of July celebration." Before Lillian could even get a word out, a striking blonde woman came over, and her expensive dress and perfect hair made her stand out from all the other women. "Well, so you're the new charity project?" she asked, her smile never quite making it to her eyes. "I'm Laura Sinclair. My daddy owns the bank." "Lillian Foster," she said, keeping her voice steady, not about to let herself be rattled. "A pleasure, Laura," Luke said, with a cool nod that let on there was some history there. "Luke," Laura's voice got all honey-sweet when she turned to him. "We've surely missed you at Sunday dinner these past few weeks. Daddy was just saying yesterday how long it's been." "Been busy with a new stock," Luke answered, his face hard to read. "Well, don't you be a stranger." Laura's eyes slid right back to Lillian, looking her up and down, "especially once your housekeeper heads back east." As Laura moseyed on off, Lydia rolled her eyes. "Don't you pay her any mind. She's been trying to get her hooks in Luke for years now." "Lydia," Luke warned, but his sister just shrugged her shoulders. "Well, it's the truth. Ever since Daddy turned down her proposal, she's had her sights bent on you." Lydia turned to Lillian with a knowing little smile. "My brother's considered quite the catch around here, you know. One of the most successful ranchers in the whole territory, and he ain't hard on the eyes neither." "That's enough now," Luke said, real firm, though Lillian could hear just a little bit of embarrassment under that stern voice of his. "We ought to get on back to the ranch." The ride on home was a lot quieter, with Tommy dozing off in the back of the wagon and Luke seemingly a million miles away. Lillian caught herself wondering about him and that banker's daughter, and just why he had turned her down. Then she quietly scolded herself for being so nosy. Luke's private life was none of her business, and besides, she would be leaving in just another week. That thought, the one that had been her comfort in those first few days, now just left a strange, empty feeling inside. Lillian looked out at the mountains, standing tall and proud against the blue sky, and she wondered when this wild, beautiful place started to feel more like a real home than just a place to hide. Her second week at the Double Circle brought some changes to their daily routine. After breakfast that Monday, Luke told her he and Tommy were fixing to ride out to the north pasture to check on a stretch of fence and would not be back till sundown. "You gonna be all right out here by yourself?" he asked Lillian, and she could see the worry in his eyes. Of course, she promised him. I have more than enough to keep my hands full. Luke paused for a moment. The rifle is in my office if you need it, though we hardly ever have trouble, and Brutus will stay with you. He nodded toward his big old black and tan dog who had taken to following Lillian around like her own shadow these past few days. We will be just fine, Lillian said, her heart warmed by his concern. Y'all be careful out there. With the men gone, the whole house felt awfully big and empty. Lillian kept herself busy with her everyday chores, and even decided to give the upstairs rooms a good deep cleaning. Come mid-afternoon, she had finished her work and decided to explore the bookshelves in the parlor, where she found a real mix of all sorts of books. There were classic stories, history books, and surprisingly, several books of poetry. She was deep into a poem by Wordsworth when a sound from the kitchen made her jump out of her skin. Brutus, who had been napping at her feet, shot his head up and let out a low rumble deep in his throat. "Hello?" Lillian called out, her heart suddenly hammering. "Is someone there?" When nobody answered, she put her book down and moved as quietly as she could toward the kitchen, with Brutus sticking close to her side. She pushed the kitchen door open and found a man rooting around in the pantry. He was tall and looked rough, with a few days of stubble on his face and clothes that looked like they had been through a wringer. He whipped around when she came in, and Lillian caught her breath at the wild look in his bloodshot eyes. Brutus's growl got meaner, the fur on his back standing right on end. "Where's Garrett?" the man demanded, his words all fuzzy around the edges. "He is not here," Lillian answered back, trying her best to keep her voice even. "Is there something I can help you with?" The man laughed, but it was a hard, ugly sound with no joy in it at all. "Yeah, you can tell Garrett that Jack Pearson wants what is coming to him." He took a step her way, and Brutus moved right up, showing off his teeth. "I reckon you ought to leave now," Lillian said with a whole lot more nerve than she was feeling. "Mr. Garrett will be back this evening. You can talk to him then." The man, Pearson, swayed on his feet, his eyes flicking from Lillian to that growling dog and back again. For a long, tense second, Lillian thought he might just come at her anyway, despite Brutus. But then he spit right there on her clean floor and turned his back. "You tell him I stopped Beta," he said over his shoulder as he headed for the door. "Tell him this is not finished." It was not until she heard his horse thunder in a way that Lillian's knees finally buckled. She just collapsed into a kitchen chair, her heart hammering in her chest as Brutus nudged her hand with his big old snout. "Good boy," she whispered, stroking his broad head. "What a good, brave boy you are." When Luke and Tommy rode in at dusk, Lillian had pulled herself together and put supper on the table, just like always, though her hands were still trembling a little as she set the food down. She waited until after they had eaten to bring up their little visitor. Luke's whole face clouded over as she told him what happened. "Jack Pearson," he confirmed. "He used to work here until I caught him stealing from me. I had to run him off about 2 months back." "He sure seemed to think you owed him something," Lillian said carefully. "He thinks I owe him the wages I kept to cover what he stole." Luke's jaw went tight. "He's been drinking his way across the territory ever since then, just stirring up trouble wherever he lands." "Should we be worried?" Lillian could not help but ask. Luke reached clear across the table to briefly cover her hand with his. "Nah, Pearson's all talk, but I am awful sorry you had to put up with him. I should have warned you he might come around." "Brutus was very protective," Lillian assured him. "I was not in any real danger." Later on that night, however, as she got ready for bed, Lillian found herself listening hard to every little creak and rustle of that old house. That run-in with Pearson had rattled her more than she wanted to admit, and not only because of any trouble he might cause, but because it had made her painfully aware of just how vulnerable she was out here, a woman alone in a strange place, dependent on the protection and kindness of a man she had known for barely 2 weeks. And yet, when she finally did drift off to sleep, it was with the comfort of knowing that Luke's room was just down the hall, and that for reasons she could not quite figure, she trusted him completely. The next morning over breakfast, Luke announced that he needed to ride into town for supplies. "Would you like to come along? You could go to that quilting circle Miss Gunderson mentioned." Lillian's face lit right up at the thought. "Well now, I would like that very much. Tommy will stay right here," Luke went on. "After what happened yesterday, I'd feel a sight better not leaving the place empty." The ride into town was real nice. with Luke pointing out all the different landmarks and telling her stories about the early days when he was just starting up the ranch. Lillian found herself genuinely laughing at his story about his first disastrous attempt at making bread, and that one time he accidentally dyed all of his clothes pink because he washed a red bandana with his white shirts. "You have built something truly remarkable here," she said with admiration as they came over a hill that gave them a wide-open view of the valley. "Not many folks could have done what you have." Luke glanced over at her, his whole expression softening. "It has been worth every single hardship." He paused, then added, "Though it does get a little lonesome out here sometimes." Before Lillian could even respond to that surprisingly personal comment, they were heading down into town, and just like that, the moment was gone. Luke dropped her off at the Gunderson home, promising to be back in a few hours. Then he headed on over to the Mercantile. The quilting circle turned out to be a wonderful distraction. The women welcomed Lillian with open arms, and she soon found herself settled in a comfortable chair, stitching and chatting away as if she had known these women for years instead of just a few days. Most were kind enough not to bring up her strange situation directly, although she did catch a few curious looks now and then. "Luke seems a little happier these past 2 weeks," Lydia commented as she worked right there beside Lillian. "More like his old self." "He has been very kind to me," Lillian replied, choosing her words with care. "Kind is not a word most folks would use for my brother," Lydia said with a little half-smile. "Honorable, a hard worker, stubborn as a mule, oh yes. But ever since Clara, he has kept most everyone at arm's length." "Clara?" Lillian could not help but ask. Lydia's hands stopped their sewing. "His intended. She passed from a fever about 6 years ago, just 1 month before they were to be married." She let out a sad sigh. Luke took it real hard. He blamed himself for not fetching the doctor sooner, even though nothing in the world could have saved her. That is when he threw himself into building the ranch, working from sunup to sundown like a man possessed. "How truly terrible," Lillian, she whispered, her heart just breaking for all the pain Luke must have carried. All at once, what he said about being left waiting at the station made perfect, painful sense. "He was," Lydia confirmed, "but lately I have seen a little of the brother I remember." She gave Lillian a knowing look. "Ever since you came to town." Before Lillian could really take that in, the ladies started talking about the big plans for the 4th of July celebration, and somehow she heard herself offering to bake a few pies for the whole town picnic. It was not until later, as she helped Mrs. Gunderson get the tea ready for everyone, that she realized she had promised to be at something happening well after she was supposed to have already left Promise Creek. When Luke came to get her in the afternoon, his wagon filled up with supplies, Lillian found herself watching the side of his face with a whole new understanding of the quiet wall she had sensed around him, the way he held a piece of himself back even when they were getting along so well. It was all starting to make sense. "So how did you get on with the quilting circle?" he asked while they rode back toward the ranch. "I liked it very much. Everyone was just as kind as could be." Lillian paused a moment, then said, "I got to properly meet your sister. Lydia seems like a wonderful woman." "That she is," Luke agreed, "even though she can talk a blue streak sometimes." Something in the way he said it made Lillian wonder if he had a feeling what Lydia had told her. "She is so proud of you," she said gently, "of everything you have built here." Luke did not say anything for a long while. "I never could have done it without her help in those first few years," he said, glancing over at Lillian, "and without Clara's encouragement before all that." So he did know what Lydia had said. Lillian picked her next words with care. "I am so very sorry for your loss, Luke." He just nodded, his eyes fixed back on the road ahead. That was a long time ago. They rode on without a word for a little bit, but it was a comfortable kind of quiet. Finally, Luke spoke up again, his voice sounding lighter. "I have got a little surprise for you back at the ranch." Lillian could not help but raise her eyebrows. "A surprise?" "You will see." When they pulled into the double circle, Luke walked her over to the corral, where Tommy was brushing a small, dappled gray mare. "This here is Penny," Luke said. "She is the gentlest horse we have. I figured you might enjoy learning how to ride while you are here." Lillian slowly walked toward the fence, a little on the cautious side. She had not spent much time around horses in Boston, and they looked as big as a house up close. The mare just turned her head and looked at Lillian with those big, soft brown eyes. "Oh, she's just beautiful," Lillian said. "But I have to admit, I have never ridden a horse before." "Folks out here ought to know how to ride," Luco said. "It is not just for fun, you see. It is mighty practical if you ever need to get somewhere in a real hurry." The thing he did not say about her run-in with Pearson hung heavy in the air between them. Lillian knew right then that Luke was offering her more than just a new hobby. He was offering her a way to be independent, a way to feel safe. "I would surely like to learn," she decided, reaching out a hesitant hand to stroke Penny's soft nose. The horse nickered real gentle-like, and Lillian felt a little spark of joy at making a new friend. "We will start tomorrow," Luke promised her. "Just the basics to begin with." Later that evening, as they sat together on the porch after dinner, they watched the sunset paint those mountains all shades of purple and gold. Lillian got to thinking about how much her ideas about the West, and about Luke, had changed in just 2 short weeks. The rough, untamed land she had been so afraid of was actually a place of stunning beauty, with a surprising sense of community. And that quiet rancher, who she thought gave her a job out of pity, had turned out to be a man with a good heart, a deep kindness, and a quiet strength. "A penny for your thoughts," Luke said softly, playing on the name of her new 4-legged friend. Lillian could not help but smile. "I was just thinking how different everything is from what I imagined." "Better or worse?" he asked. "Different," she said again. Then she added, "Truthfully, better in so many ways." Luke turned to look at her, the twilight making his face seem softer. "The train comes the day after tomorrow. Have you decided if you are still planning on heading back east?" The question took Lillian by surprise, even though she knew it was coming. Of course she was going back to Boston. That had always been the plan, but the thought of leaving this place filled her with a sadness she did not expect. I reckon I am," she said, her voice not nearly as sure as she wanted it to be. Luke nodded, his face was hard to read in the growing dark. "Well, there is still a little time yet. Change your mind, if you took a notion to." Before Lillian could ask what in the world he meant, Tommy hollered from the barn that one of the horses was looking a bit colicky, and Luke excused himself to go check on the poor animal. Lillian stayed right there on the porch, just watching as the first stars started popping out in the darkening sky. Her mind was as big and restless as that Montana night. The next morning came up clear and warm, just perfect for Lillian's very first riding lesson. Right after breakfast, Luke walked her out to the corral where Penny was waiting, already saddled up. "Now we'll take this nice and easy," he told her, showing her how to hold the reins, where to set her feet in the stirrups, and how to sit square in the saddle. His hands were gentle but steady as he helped fix her posture, and Lillian tried her best to ignore the warmth that spread right through her from his touch. For the next hour or so, Luke led Penny around that corral, while Lillian started getting used to the rhythm of the horse's walk. By the time they were done, her cheeks were rosy with excitement and a real sense of accomplishment. "Well, look at you. You're a natural," Luke praised, helping her down from the saddle. "Tomorrow we can try letting you take the reins all by yourself." "Tomorrow," Lillian said again, the word reminding her that her time at the double circle was running out awful fast. "Luke, about that train," but before she could finish, the sound of horses coming up the road got their attention. 3 riders were making their way up to the ranch. 2 men and a woman, all of them dressed in fancy clothes like they were important folks from town. As they got closer, Lillian recognized Laura Sinclair, riding next to an older man who favored her something fierce, and a third rider she had never seen before. "Luke," Laura called out, her voice drifting clear across the yard. "Well, what a lovely surprise to find you at home." Luke's face hardened just a little as he walked over to greet his visitors. "Laura, Mr. Sinclair, James." He nodded to each of them in turn. "What brings y'all out this way?" The older fella, who was plainly Laura's father, got down from his horse with a little help from the third rider. "Business, son? Always business." He shot a look over at Lillian, not even trying to hide his curiosity. "Aren't you going to introduce us to your guest?" "This here is Miss Lillian Foster," Luke said, his voice all formal-like. "Lillian, this here is Howard Sinclair, the man who owns the Promise Creek Bank. And this is James Thornton, his associate." "A pleasure, ma'am," Mr. Sinclair said, giving his hat a little tip. His eyes, just as calculating as his daughter's, shifted between Lillian and Luke. Laura mentioned y'all had taken in a traveler who ran into some trouble. That's mighty charitable of you, Garrett. The way he said it got Lillian's back up, but she kept a polite smile on her face. Mr. Garrett has been awfully kind. Oh yes, Laura agreed, her own smile as brittle as dried leaves. So very kind. But I do understand you'll be leaving us soon, won't you, Miss Foster? Before Lillian could get a word in, Luke spoke up. Why don't we all head inside and continue this talk? It is getting a bit warm out here in the sun. As they all walked toward the house, Lillian found herself walking right beside James Thornton, a young fellow with a pleasant face who seemed genuinely interested in what she thought about Montana. It must be a whole different world from Boston, he commented. I visited there one time as a boy. It is a beautiful city. It sure is, Lillian agreed. But I have found a beauty here too, just a different kind altogether. Once inside, Luke offered them something cool to drink while Mr. Sinclair got right down to brass tacks. A proposal to purchase a section of Luke's land that sat right next to a silver mine that had recently shown some very promising signs. The price I am offering is more than fair, Sinclair said, naming a sum that made Lillian's eyes go wide. You would be a plain fool to refuse it. That land has the creek that waters most of my grazing area, Luke replied, his voice as steady as a rock. It is not for sale at any price. Sinclair's face hardened up. Be reasonable, Garrett. That mine could bring a whole lot of prosperity to this entire region. Your few hundred head of cattle are nothing compared to the potential wealth sitting in that ground. Those few hundred head are my livelihood, Luke said, his voice still calm, but with an edge of solid steel just underneath. And that creek makes sure they survive through the long drought years. The tense negotiation kept on going, getting more and more heated. Lillian, sensing she was not needed for this part, excused herself to go and prepare some lunch. Laura followed her right into the kitchen. You have settled in quite comfortably, the banker's daughter observed, watching Lillian move so efficiently around the room. A person might almost think you were the lady of the house instead of just some temporary help. Lillian scooped coffee into the pot, her hand steady as a rock. I have just been trying to be useful during my stay. Oh, I am sure you have. Laura's voice was dripping with insinuation. Luke is a handsome man, isn't he? And so very vulnerable. A widower living all alone, just starved for a woman's company. Luke was never married, Lillian corrected, before she could stop the words from coming out. Laura's eyebrows shot right up. Well now, he shared his tragic little story with you, has he? Clara has been gone for years, but he has never gotten over her. And he never will, she leaned in a little closer. Did he tell you they were childhood sweethearts? That he promised to love her forever? Each word was a sharp little thorn, aimed deliberately to wound. Lillian kept her eyes on slicing the bread, refusing to show how deeply they cut. Mr. Garrett's past is his own business. Why, of course it is, Laura agreed. Smooth as you please, just like your future is yours. But do not fool yourself into thinking there is a place for you here. Luke Garrett might be kind enough to take in a stranded mail-order bride, but that man will never love again. Everyone in Promise Creek knows that. Before Lillian could even think of a reply, Luke appeared in the doorway. Is everything all right in here? Just perfect, Laura said with a big, bright smile. Miss Foster and I were just getting to know each other. Luke's gaze shifted from Laura's satisfied face to Lillian's, which was as calm as she could make it. Sinclair and Thornton are ready to leave. They have decided not to stay for lunch. What a shame, Mamoy, Laura sighed. Another time, perhaps. She turned to Lillian with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Have a safe journey back to Boston, Miss Foster. I am sure you will be much happier there. After the visitors finally rode off, a heavy silence fell between Luke and Lillian. She just kept herself busy serving the lunch she had made, while he seemed to be lost in his own thoughts. I need to apologize for Sinclair's behavior, Luke finally said, and for whatever Laura might have said to you. She can be a real handful. There is no need for you to apologize, Lillian assured him. Mr. Sinclair seems awfully determined to get his hands on your land. He is, and he is not a man who is used to being told no. Luke's expression was grim. That fella is dangerous. Surely he wouldn't do something against the law. Howard Sinclair knows how to walk right up to the line of the law, technically, but he sure ain't above leaning on folks who get in his way. Luke let out a long sigh. He's been trying to get his hands on that section for years. Ever since folks started whispering about silver in the ground, I've told him no every time. Lillian paused, then asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. Is it true? Is there something going on between you and Laura? Luke looked taken aback, then he grimaced. Not on my side of things. Laura got it in her head years ago that being Mrs. Luke Garrett would give her the high society life she wants and get her daddy access to my land. For her father, she's been mighty persistent, even though I've shown no interest at all. A wave of relief washed over Lillian, but right behind it came confusion about her own feelings. Why in the world did it matter to her if Luke had a soft spot for Laura Sinclair? She was fixing to leave tomorrow. The thought hit her with a sharp pang that she tried hard to ignore. About that train, she started to say again, but Luke stood up suddenly. I owed Bob to go check on that fence in the north pasture, he said. I'll be back by supper time. And before Lillian could say another word, he was gone, leaving her with the uneasy feeling that he was trying to dodge this conversation on purpose. The afternoon just seemed to drag on as Lillian went about her chores with less than her usual spirit. Her mind kept wandering back to Luke and the train that was coming to take her all the way back to Boston. She had enough money for her ticket now, with a little extra besides, just like Luke had promised. There was not a single thing keeping her in Promise Creek. Nothing except for the growing feeling deep down that she did not want to leave anymore. It was pure madness, she knew. She had only known Luke Garrett for about 2 weeks. Her family was back in Boston, along with everything that was familiar and safe. What on earth would she do in Montana? Just keep on being Luke's housekeeper forever? The whole idea was just plain ridiculous. And yet, as Lillian kneaded the bread dough with more force than was needed, she could not deny that something inside her had changed during these past few days. She had found a kind of strength and grit she never knew she had. She had found a deep satisfaction in work, that things that would have seemed beneath her in Boston. And she had met a man whose quiet goodness and steady heart had begun to mend the hurt left by Ethan Wallace's betrayal. When Luke came back for supper, a new kind of quiet settled between them that neither one of them said a word about. They talked about easy things like the horses, the weather, and the chores that needed doing around the ranch. Young Tommy, sensing the air was a little thick, made himself scarce, leaving them all alone with all the things they were not saying. Here, let me give you a hand with those dishes, Luke offered, as Lillian began to clear off the table. They worked side by side in the kitchen, and that simple, familiar chore somehow felt more personal than ever before. When their hands brushed as Luke passed her a plate, Lillian felt a little spark run right through her that took her breath clean away. Lillian, Luke said all of a sudden, his voice real soft. There is something I need to say. She turned to face him, her heart just hammering in her chest. I know, he said. I know you are fixing to head back to Boston tomorrow. He paused for a moment, then the words came tumbling out. But I was hoping you might think about staying. Not as my housekeeper, mind you, though you are welcome to keep on with that role if you want, but because I truly think you belong here. Lillian just stared at him, hardly daring to believe her own ears. Lillian, I know this is all too soon, he went on quickly. I know you have been hurt, and the very last thing in the world I want to do is pressure you. But these past 2 weeks, they have changed something for me. You have changed something. Laura told me you would never love again after Clara, Lillian whispered, the fear that had been holding her back finally finding its voice. Luke's whole expression softened. Clara will always have a place in my heart, but I have learned that a heart can grow to hold a new love right alongside the memories of the old. He took one step closer. I am not asking for any promises, Lillian, just for time. Time for you to decide if Promise Creek and if I could ever be enough for you. Tears started to well up in Lillian's eyes. I have been so confused, she admitted, trying to sort out what I thought I wanted with what I have found right here. I came west looking for a new beginning, and instead of finding it with Ethan Wallace, you found it with me, Luke finished softly. At least I am hoping you did. I did, Lillian whispered. She agreed, her voice a bit steadier. But I'm worried, Luke. What if this is not real? What if I am just feeling grateful? Or maybe you are just feeling lonely. It is not either of those, Luke said, plain as day. What I feel for you is real, Lillian. More real than anything I have felt in a long, long time. But I understand why you are being careful. He took her hand, real gentle. Just stay one more month. Give us that time to be certain. If you still want to go back to Boston, well, I will take you to the station myself. Lillian looked deep into his eyes, which were so full of honesty and hope, and she felt her worries start to melt away. 1 month, she agreed, and then we will decide. Pure relief and joy washed right over Luke's face. Real slow, giving her plenty of time to pull back, he lowered his head and gently brushed his lips against hers. It was a kiss so sweet it brought new tears to her eyes. 1 month, he repeated, his voice a little thick. Startin' tomorrow. The morning came with golden sunlight pouring through Lillian's window and a feeling that anything was possible, which made her heart feel light. She dressed carefully in her blue riding skirt, looking forward to the day and getting back to her riding lessons. When she got downstairs, she found Luke was already at the stove cooking up some breakfast. He turned when she came in, a big smile lighting up his face. Morning. Good morning. Lillian moved over to help him, and the two of them moved around that kitchen as easy and in step as if they had been doing it for years instead of just a few days. Over breakfast, they talked about their plans for the day. I was thinking we could keep on with your riding lesson this morning, Luke suggested. Then after that, maybe you would like to see a little more of the ranch. There is a special spot down by the creek I would love to show you. Tommy, who was watching them with a curious look he was not hiding too well, hid a smile behind his coffee cup. I can hold down the fort here if you two want to be gone for most of the day, he offered up. Thank you, Tommy, Lillian said, and she could not help but smile herself. That would be wonderful. The riding lesson went a whole lot smoother than Lillian had ever expected. With Luke's calm and steady help, she quickly got the hang of how to handle Penny, and by the middle of the morning, she was confidently guiding that sweet mare all around the corral. You are ready for the trail, Luke said, and you could hear the pride in his voice. Let's go on a real ride. So they set out across the rolling prairie. Luke was on his bay horse, and Lillian was on Penny, with a lunch sack tied right behind Luke's saddle. The day was just perfect, warm but not too hot, with a soft breeze carrying the sweet smell of wildflowers and sagebrush. Lillian felt a kind of freedom she had never known before, as Penny carried her steady as a rock right next to Luke's horse. So, how does it feel? Luke asked, watching her delight with a big old smile. It is wonderful, Lillian admitted. I never could understand why folks love riding so much, but I get it now. It is like you are flying, but your feet are still on the ground. They rode for about an hour. Luke pointed out different landmarks and told her stories about his first days on the ranch. Before long, they came to a bend in the creek where some tall cottonwood trees offered plenty of shade and the water got real deep before it flowed on. This right here is my favorite spot on the whole ranch, Luke said, helping Lillian get down from her horse. I come out here when I need to clear my head. They spread a blanket under the biggest tree and sat down next to each other, just looking at the water sparkle in the sunshine. Luke unpacked their lunch, which was cold chicken, some bread, cheese, and apples, and they ate together quietly, just enjoying the peace. Every now and then, one of them would mention how beautiful it all was. I used to dream about places like this when I was just a little girl, Lillian confessed. I would read all those adventure stories about the Wild West and just imagine these wide-open spaces and endless skies. Then, as I got older, I guess I let those dreams fade away for more practical things. Until you saw Ethan Wallace's advertisement? Luke asked her gently. Lillian just nodded. It felt like a chance to get that feeling of adventure back, while still making what seemed like a sensible choice. My parents, they thought I was being impulsive and completely reckless. And what about now, Luke asked. What would they think of all this? He motioned between the two of them, and she knew exactly what he meant. Oh, they would think I have lost my mind, Lillian said with a little laugh. But they would also see that I am happier than I have been in a long, long time. She turned to look right at him. I am happy, Luke. I am happier than I ever thought I could be, especially after everything that happened with Ethan. Luke reached over and gently tucked a stray piece of hair behind her ear, letting his fingers rest on her cheek for a moment. I want to make you happy, Lillian, and I don't just mean for a month or a year, but for a whole lifetime. The look in his eyes just about stole her breath. Luke, now I know it's mighty early to be talking about forever, he said quickly, but I want you to know that's where my heart is headed. I've spent 6 long years keeping folks at arm's length, convinced I'd already had my one and only shot at love. Then you showed up on that train platform, looking a little lost, but with the fire in your eyes. And something deep inside me knew you weren't just someone who needed a hand, but someone who could help me start really living again. Tears started to well up in Lillian's eyes at his words. I felt it too, she whispered back. That feeling like I already knew you, even when I was trying so hard to keep my guard up and remember that this wasn't meant to last. Luke leaned in real slow, giving her plenty of time to pull back, if she wanted to, but Lillian met him right in the middle, their lips touching in a kiss that started out soft and then grew with all the feelings they'd both been holding back. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her in close, and Lillian just felt herself melt right into his arms, all her worries fading away in that happy moment. When they finally broke apart, they were both a little breathless. Luke rested his forehead against hers. We probably ought to head on back, he said, sounding like he didn't want to. Before I go and forget, I promise to give you some time. Lillian nodded, even though a part of her wished they could just stay right there in that perfect moment forever. They gathered up their picnic things and got back on their horses for the ride home. The trip back to the ranch was full of quiet looks and little smiles that said more than words ever could about how things were changing. As they came up over the last rise before the ranch house came into sight, Luke suddenly pulled his horse to a stop, his whole face changing from happy to worried. What's wrong? Lillian asked, looking where he was looking. Down at the ranch, even from way up here, she could tell something wasn't right. There were several horses she'd never seen before. Tied to the hitching post, and a plume of smoke was curling up from behind the barn. Trouble, Luke said, his voice low and serious, as he nudged his horse forward. You stay right close to me, came thundering down that hill, and as they got closer, Lillian could just make out a few figures, men milling about in the yard. And a cold dread washed over her when she recognized one of them. It was Jack Pearson, the very man who'd cornered her in the kitchen. Luke reined his horse to a stop right at the edge of the yard, signaling for Lillian to hang back behind him. Pearson, he hollered out, what in the Sam Hill do you think you're doing? Pearson spun around, a mean old grin stretching right across his face when he laid eyes on Luke. Well now, look what the cat dragged in. We've been having ourselves a little get-together, Garrett. A real shame you missed the beginning of it. And that's when Lillian saw exactly what was on fire. It was a haystack out behind the barn, with flames licking awfully close to the wooden walls. Two fellas she'd never seen before were sprawled out on the porch with bottles in their hands, while another one was trying to stuff a spooked chicken into a burlap sack. Where's Tommy? Luke demanded, his voice quiet and cold as a snake. Oh, the boy. He's taken a little nap in the barn, Pearson chuckled. Put up a heck of a fight before old Johnson here convinced him to get some rest. Luke's hand drifted down to his waistband, right where Lillian knew he kept his pistol. You've got about 10 seconds to get off my property, Pearson, before I forget that I'm a civilized man. Well now, that ain't very neighborly, Pearson drawled back, especially seeing as how we're here on business. Mr. Sinclair sends his best. Lillian couldn't help but gasp when she heard the banker's name. Luke's face turned to stone. Sinclair sent you to do this? Let's just say he figured you might be more open to his offer if you ran into a little trouble here at your ranch. Pearson took a slow step forward, letting his coat fall open to show the gun on his hip. Nothing personal, Garrett. It's just business. You could have cutted the tension in that yard with a knife as the other men fanned out to back up Pearson. The way they stood made it plain they were just itching for a fight. Luke remained perfectly still, his eyes taking in the whole situation, cool as a cucumber. Lillian, he said in a low voice, I need you to ride for town as fast as that horse will carry you. Go find Sheriff Davis and tell him what's going on out here. I am not leaving you, she protested. You have to, Luke said firmly. It's the only real chance we've got. Before Lillian could say another word, a gunshot cracked the air, kicking up dust right by Luke's horse's hooves. The poor creature went up on its hind legs, and Luke had to fight to get it settled, all while keeping a hard eye on Pearson and his crew. "Y'all ain't going nowhere," Pearson growled. "Not until we finish our business here." Business. Just then a figure appeared in the doorway of the house. It was Tommy, his face all banged up, but standing tall, holding Luke's rifle, aimed steady as a rock at Pearson's back. "Drop that iron, mister," the young fella called out, "or I'll be the one to drop you." That little distraction was all Luke needed. Smooth as you please, he drew his own pistol and aimed it square at Pearson. "This is over, Jack. Tell your boys to stand down." Pearson paused for a second. You could see him thinking hard, knowing he was caught between two guns. At last, with a foul word, he put his hands up. "Don't shoot, Garrett. I was just doing what I was told." "Orders that were going to land you in a jail cell," Luke said, his voice like ice. "Tommy, you keep that rifle on him while I get him tied up. Lillian, can you douse that fire before it gets to the barn?" For the next wild hour, Lillian worked right alongside Luke and Tommy to get these fellas secured and put out that blaze for good. By the time they had the whole mess under control, the sun was dipping low, and all three of them were worn out and covered in soot. "We need to get these men to town," Luke said, glancing at the four sorry-looking figures tied up and sitting on the porch, "and have a long talk with Sheriff Davis about Mr. Howard Sinclair's way of doing business." "I'm going with you," Lillian said, her voice firm. "I want to give my own statement about what that Pearson fella said about Mr. Sinclair." Luke looked like he was about to argue, but then he just nodded. "Tommy, you reckon you can handle the wagon with these four?" "Yes, sir," Tommy answered, his young face real serious under that bruise darkening his cheekbone. "They won't be giving me any more trouble, not now." So they loaded the prisoners into the back of the wagon, with Tommy holding the reins, and Luke and Lillian followed behind on horseback. That ride into town was tense, but it was quiet. Seems Pearson and his boys had lost their appetite for any more trouble. Now Sheriff Davis, he was a big fellow with a gray stroked his beard, listening to their account with growing concern. "This is a serious matter, Luke," he said when they had finished, "accusing a man like Howard Sinclair of arranging an attack on your property. That is not something I can take lightly without some real proof." "But Pearson admitted it," Lillian pointed out. "He said Sinclair sent them to stir up trouble so Luke would be more agreeable to his offer." The word of a known drunkard against one of the most respected men in the territory, the sheriff sighed. "That is not much to build a case on." "Then you must question Sinclair," Luke insisted. "Those men did not just happen to target my ranch on the very same day Sinclair tried to pressure me into selling." Sheriff Davis rubbed his jaw, deep in thought. "I will have a talk with him. I cannot promise more than that right now." He then glanced over at Lillian. "Miss Foster, I will need your formal statement come morning. It is getting quite late now." It was certainly well past dark by the time they stepped out of the sheriff's office. The town was quiet, and most businesses were closed for the night. "We should get a couple of rooms at the hotel," Luke suggested. "It is far too late to head back to the ranch tonight." The Promise Creek Hotel was a modest two-story building right on the main street. The owner, Mrs. Wilkins, a plump and motherly woman, clucked sympathetically when she heard about their ordeal. "Why, of course we have rooms available," she assured them with a kind smile. "Though I am afraid they are not next to each other, one at each end of the hall, in fact." "That is perfectly fine," Lillian said quickly, feeling a warm blush rise to her cheeks at the implication. "And you two must be needing something to eat," Mrs. Wilkins continued. "I will have some dinner trays sent up and hot water for washing. You both look as if you have been through a terrible ordeal." In her simply furnished but spotless room, Lillian gratefully washed away the smoke and grime of the day and changed into a nightgown and a wrapper from the small bag Luke had been thoughtful enough to bring from the ranch. She had just finished putting her hair into a braid when a soft knock came at her door. "Lillian, it is me," Luke's voice called out gently. "I have brought your dinner." She opened the door to find him standing there, looking similarly refreshed, his hair damp from washing and wearing a clean shirt, though his face still looked a mite tired from everything that happened. "Mrs. Wilkins was mighty insistent I bring this to you myself," he explained, holding up a tray piled high with food. Mind if I come on in? Back home, letting a man into her hotel room just was not done. A single woman alone with a man would cause a whole lot of talk in Boston, but they were a long way from Boston, and after the day they just had, that kind of worry felt plain silly. Please come in, she said, moving out of the way. Luke put the tray down on a little table near the window and turned to her. For a long moment, they just stood there looking at each other, with the whole day hanging in the air. You doing all right? He finally asked. Today turned out to be a sight more eventful than I had planned for your first day here. Even with everything that had happened, Lillian couldn't help but smile. I'm fine, just worried about you and Tommy, is all. Oh, Tommy's tougher than a $2 steak, Luke told her, and I've squared off with fellas a whole lot meaner than Jack Pearson. His face got serious. It is Sinclair that has got me concerned, if he is willing to pull a stunt like this. The sheriff is going to ask him some hard questions, Lillian said, trying to sound braver than she truly felt. And even if he cannot pin it on Sinclair, surely what happened today will be enough to make him back down. Luke just shook his head. Men like Howard Sinclair do not let go that easy, not when there is a pile of money on the line. He let out a long breath, running a hand through his hair. I am real sorry, Lillian. This is not the kind of welcome I wanted for you. What are you talking about? All this trouble, the rough and tumble, the hard truth of how life is out here? He looked her straight in the eye. You deserve a peaceful life, not some fellow whose enemies might try to burn down his barn or do something even worse. Lillian stepped a little closer and put her hand on his arm. Luke Garrett, if you think a little bit of trouble is going to send me running back to Boston, then you do not know me at all yet. Surprise and then a wave of relief washed right over his face. You mean you are not having second thoughts about staying? If anything, Lillian said, her voice steady, today just made me more certain. I want to be right here, Luke, with you. A small smile touched her lips. Besides, we did agree on a month, remember? I'm not about to leave until you have taught me how to really ride a horse, at the very least. All the tension just seemed to melt right out of Luke. Body. He lifted a hand to her cheek, his touch as gentle as a summer breeze. You are the most amazing woman I have ever known, Lillian Foster. And you, she answered back, are the most honorable man I have ever had the pleasure of knowing. She leaned right into his touch. Now, are you going to give me a proper kiss, or are we just gonna let this fine moment go to waste? Luke let out a low, warm laugh and pulled her into his arms. Well, it would be a shame for me to waste a single moment with you, he murmured, right before his lips met hers. This kiss was different from the ones they had shared before. It was deeper, more urgent, and filled with the relief of having faced danger together and coming out all right. Lillian's arms wrapped around his neck, her body pressing in closer to his as the kiss went on, with neither of them wanting to be the first one to pull away. When they finally parted, they were both breathing a little hard. Luke rested his forehead against hers. I ought to get going, he said, though he sounded reluctant before I get completely carried away. Lillian nodded, even though a part of her was wishing he would stay. Tomorrow, she said, we will face whatever comes, together. Together, Luke agreed, pressing one more quick kiss to her lips before he finally made himself step back. Sleep well, Lillian. After he was gone, Lillian sat by the window, just picking at the food on her tray and watching the quiet street down below. So much had changed in such a short time. Just 2 weeks ago, she had been a desperate, abandoned bride-to-be with no real prospects and very little hope. Now, what was she? Not quite a housekeeper anymore. Not yet anything you could put a name to. But as she finally climbed into her bed, Lillian realized that not knowing what was next did not frighten her. For what felt like the very first time in her life, she was making choices based not on what was expected of her, but on what her own heart was telling her was right. And her heart was telling her, more and more certainly, that her future was right here in Promise Creek with Luke Garrett. The next morning was a whirlwind of activity. Lillian gave her official statement to Sheriff Davis, who let them know he had already sent a deputy out to have a talk with Howard Sinclair. Luke arranged to get the damaged section of the barn repaired and bought new supplies to replace what had been destroyed or taken. By mid-morning, they were all set to head back to the ranch. But just as they were fixing to leave, a ruckus down the street caught their attention. It was Howard Sinclair with his daughter and that ever-present fella, James Thornton, in tow, Thornton marching straight for the sheriff's office, his face all puffed up and red with anger. "Garrett," he hollered, seeing Luke standing outside the general store. "How in the world dare you spread such awful lies about me?" Luke turned, cool as a cucumber, to face that banker. "Well, they ain't lies if they're the truth, Sinclair. You really expect folks to believe I'd hire some common ruffians to scare you?" Sinclair's voice was just dripping with contempt. "I am a respected businessman." "Jack Pearson tells a different story," Luke replied, his voice steady as ever. "And considering his attack happened right after you paid me a visit, I'm inclined to find his story mighty believable." A small crowd was starting to form, drawn in by the showdown between two of the biggest names in the county. Lillian saw Sheriff Davis step out of his office, a worried look on his face. "Pearson is a no-good drunk and a liar," Sinclair insisted. "He'd say anything to save his own hide." "Maybe so," Luke allowed, "but the question still stands. Why would he pick my ranch to target on the very same day you tried to strong-arm me into selling? That's quite a coincidence, don't you reckon?" Sinclair's face got even darker. "You've made a grave mistake, Garrett. I'll sue you for slander. I will ruin you." "Now that's enough, Howard," Sheriff Davis cut in, his voice firm as an old oak tree. "I've questioned Pearson and his boys from top to bottom. Their stories all line up. They claim you paid them to stir up trouble out at the Double Circle, with the understanding that if Garrett here still wouldn't sell, they were supposed to take things up a notch." "That's absurd," Sinclair sputtered, but Lillian caught a flicker of real worry in his eyes. "It's their word against mine." "Actually," James Thornton spoke up out of the blue, "it's not." Every single eye in that crowd turned to the young man who looked uncomfortable as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs, but determined. "I was there when Mr. Sinclair met with Pearson at the bank 2 days back. I heard him give the man the specific instructions about doing damage to the ranch." Laura gasped. "James, what on earth are you doing?" Thornton stood a little taller. "The right thing, Laura, just this once." He turned to face Sheriff Davis. "I'll tell you everything, Sheriff. I know I should have said something sooner, but I was worried about my job." Sinclair's face went from red to pale as a ghost. "You backstabbing little weasel," he spat. "You are done for in this town." "No, Howard," the sheriff said, his voice low. "I reckon you're the one whose time is up. I am placing you under arrest for conspiracy and trying to destroy property." He nodded to his deputy. "Go on and take Mr. Sinclair down to the jail. We will get this all sorted out there." As they led Sinclair off, hollering the whole way, Laura spun on Luke, her eyes full of poison. "This is all on you, every bit of it." Her eyes shot over to Lillian. "And you, with your meddling, holier-than-thou ways." "That will be enough, Miss Sinclair," Luke cut in, his voice like ice. "Your daddy made his own bed. Now he has got to lie in it." Laura's pretty face twisted up with pure rage, but then she seemed to pull herself together. "This is not over," she said, her voice quiet but full of fire, before turning on her heel and storming off. The crowd started to break up, whispering to each other about everything that just went down. Lillian came up to Luke's side and slid her hand into his. "Are you okay?" she asked in a soft voice. He gave her hand a squeeze. "I sure am now." He looked over at James Thornton, who was standing there looking a bit lost. "Thank you for speaking up like that. I know that was not easy." Thornton just shrugged. "I have been working for Mr. Sinclair for 3 years. In all that time, I have watched him bend the rules, scare good folks, and use his power to get his way. But this was the line I just could not let him cross." "So what are you going to do now?" Lillian asked him. "Well, I am not rightly sure," Thornton admitted. "With Sinclair facing all these charges, the bank's future is all up in the air." Luke looked at the younger fella, real thoughtful, like. "The Double Circle could use a man with a head for numbers," he said after a little bit. "Someone who knows banking to help run the business end of the ranch. That is, if you are interested." Surprise and then a little bit of hope showed on Thornton's face. "You are offering me a job?" "When it counted, you did the right thing," Luke said plainly. "That is the kind of fella I need. Working with me." By early afternoon, they were finally making their way back to the ranch, Lillian riding Penny feeling more sure in the saddle, and Luke right beside her on his bay horse. All that business in town had set them back some, But Sheriff Davis had promised them that Howard Sinclair would stay locked up tight until a judge could ride in from Helena to hear the case. "Do you reckon Laura will stir up more trouble?" Lillian asked while they rode. Luke thought on that for a moment. "Could be. She is not the type to lose gracefully. But with her daddy's power gone, she does not have many places to turn." "And what about James Thornton? Do you truly trust him to work here on the ranch?" "I believe in giving a man a chance to prove his worth," Luke said. "He showed some real grit today. That has got to count for something." They rode in a comfortable silence for a time, watching the landscape roll by in waves of gold and green under the summer sun. Lillian got to thinking about how fast a life can turn, how just 2 weeks before she had stepped off that train into what felt like a complete disaster, only to find a surprising new road to happiness. "What is on your mind?" Luke asked, seeing the thoughtful look on her face. "I am thinking about fate," Lillian answered truthfully, "and how sometimes the thing that feels like your worst moment ends up leading to your best one." Luke smiled, and that smile just lit up his whole face. "Kind of like being left at a train station." "Exactly like being left at a train station," she agreed, smiling right back at him. "And then having a handsome cowboy say, 'You have been waiting for me.'" "Best words I ever said," Luke replied softly, even if I did not realize back then just how true they really were. As the Double Circle Ranch came into view, Lillian felt a powerful wave of emotion. She had not been expecting to feel like she was coming home, like she belonged. The buildings tucked into the valley were not just a temporary roof over her head anymore, but a place where she could actually picture a future. Tommy came out to meet them in the yard, a big, relieved grin spreading across his face when he saw them. "Everything turn out all right in town?" he asked, helping Lillian down from her horse. "Better than all right," Luke told him with a nod. "Sinclair is behind bars and his whole crooked scheme is out in the open, and we might have a new hand joining the crew before long." As Luke started to tell him about James Thornton, Lillian walked on up to the house, stopping on the porch to gaze out at the wide-open Montana country that stretched all the way to the far-off mountains. The pure beauty of it still left her breathless, but now it did not feel so strange or overwhelming. This wild and beautiful land had started to take a hold of her heart, just like the man who had built his life right here. Later on that evening, after the supper dishes were put away and Tommy had turned in, out in his room in the barn, Luke and Lillian sat on the porch swing, just watching the stars pop out in the darkening sky. He had his arm around her shoulders, and her head was resting easy against his chest. "Well, that's one day down," Luke said softly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. 29 more to go," Lillian smiled. "Are you keeping count?" "Every single minute," he confessed. "I'm just hoping that when those 29 days are over, you will figure out that a month just was not near enough time thereafter." "Oh, oh," Lillian looked up at him. "And just how much time would be enough, in your opinion?" Luke's face turned serious. "A lifetime, Lillian Foster. Nothing less." Her heart just about burst at his simple words. "That sounds about right to me," she whispered. And then she lifted her lips to his. As they kissed under that big Montana sky, Lillian knew for certain that she had finally found the place she was meant to be. Not in the prim and proper world of Boston society, but right here in this wild, beautiful place with this good and honorable man who had been waiting for her this whole time. The days that came after settled into a new kind of rhythm. Not exactly the boss and employee way it was before, but a real partnership. Two equals learning to build a life together. Lillian kept on managing the house and cooking the meals. But now Luke asked her opinion on decisions about the ranch too, valuing her common sense and the new way she saw things. Her riding got better every day with Luke's patient help, until she could ride right alongside him on the long trips around the property. They spent hours just exploring together. Luke would share what he knew about the land and its seasons, and Lillian just soaked it all up with real interest. James Thornton came to live with them about a week after that showdown in town. He settled into a small cabin near the main house, the very one that had belonged to the foreman before him. His knack for keeping the books proved to be a real blessing, and his quiet, considerate way about him soon made him part of their one-of-a-kind family. As July rolled around, getting ready for the Independence Day celebration took up just about all of their time and energy. Lillian jumped into the planning with a whole lot of heart, baking pies and helping to set up games for the children. This get-together would be her first real introduction to the whole community as something more than just the mail-order bride who got left at the altar, and she would dead set on making a fine impression. The morning of the 4th of July dawned clear and beautiful. Lillian was up before the sun to finish her baking, humming a soft tune while she worked away in the kitchen. Luke found her there, with flour dust in her cheeks and her sleeves rolled high, looking happier than he'd ever seen her. "Morning," he said, leaning in to kiss her flour-dusted cheek. "You've sure been busy." "6 apple pies and 4 cherry," she answered, mighty proud. "You reckon that's enough for this whole territory?" Luke teased, sneaking a little taste of cherry filling from a nearby bowl. "You're going to be the most popular lady at the whole picnic." "Second most," Lillian corrected him with a smile. "Your sister tells me her pies always take home the first place ribbon." "Oh, but Lydia has not had to go up against you before." Luke wrapped his strong arms around her waist, pulling her close to him, not minding her flour-covered hands one bit. "Besides, I know which baker I'm rooting for." By mid-morning, they were all on their way into town, their wagon loaded down with peas, blankets, and all the fixin' for a picnic. Tommy rode his horse right alongside them, while James followed behind in a second wagon, carrying some extra ranch hands who had shown up the week before to help out with all the summer chores. Promise Creek was all dressed up for the big celebration. Red, white, and blue decorations were hanging from all the storefronts, and a big open space near the creek was set up with tables, a wooden dance floor, and even a bandstand. Little kids were running around all excited, while the grown-ups were greeting each other with happy holiday wishes. Lillian was surprised and truly touched by the warm welcome she got from everyone. The ladies she had met at the quilting circle introduced her to the other folks, and a whole lot of the townspeople seemed truly pleased as punch that she had decided to stay. "You've brought the light back to Luke's eyes," Mrs. Gunderson whispered, leaning in as they set out the pies on the dessert table. "The whole town has noticed it." Lillian blushed. "He has done the very same for me." The day flew by in a happy blur of activity, with games for the children, a shooting contest for the men, which Luke won easily, and a big community meal that stretched across a line of tables. As the afternoon bled into evening, folks lit the lanterns, and the band struck up a real lively tune. "May I have this dance?" Luke asked, appearing right at Lillian's side and offering his hand with a formal little bow that made her laugh. "Well, I did not know you could dance," she said as he led her out onto the floor. "Darling, there is a lot you still do not know about me," he replied with a friendly wink. "I am a man of many hidden talents." To Lillian's absolute delight, Luke turned out to be a wonderful dancer, guiding her so confidently through a waltz and then a much more spirited reel. They danced several more songs before they finally took a break, both of them flushed and laughing. "Let us walk for a bit," Luke suggested, offering her his arm. "It is getting a little crowded in here." They took a stroll down along the creek, the sounds of the party fading away behind them. The evening was just perfect, warm but not too hot, with a soft breeze carrying the sweet smell of wildflowers in the creek. Little fireflies were dancing all around in the reeds, and up above them, the first stars were just starting to pop out in the darkening sky. "Are you happy?" Luke asked, glancing down at her. "Very," Lillian confirmed, giving his arm a gentle squeeze. "I cannot remember the last time I enjoyed a holiday this much." They walked on in a comfortable silence for a little while, until Luke guided her to a small footbridge that went over the creek. In the distance, they could still hear the band playing, but right here it was so peaceful, with only the sound of the water flowing beneath them and the crickets singing out in the grass. "Lillian," Luke said, turning to face her, "there is something I want to ask you." Her heart beat a little faster at the serious sound of his voice. "Now, we agreed on a month for you to decide if you wanted to stay in Promise Creek," he began. "We are only halfway through that time, and I promised I would not pressure you." Took both her hands in his, "But I reckon I can't wait another minute to tell you what is in my heart." Lillian's breath hitched when Luke let go of one of her hands to reach into his pocket. When he pulled out a small velvet box, she felt tears well right up in her eyes. "I have loved you since the very moment I laid eyes on you standing all alone on that platform," Luke said, his voice low. Not out of pity or loneliness, but because something deep in my soul knew it had found its other half in you. These last few weeks have only gone to show what I knew way back then, that you are the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. He opened the box, and inside was a ring, a single perfect diamond, set in gold, simple as can be, but just beautiful. This here was my mother's, he explained. I have held on to it all these years, just waiting for the right woman to come along. Luke then went down on one knee on the bridge, still holding her hand. Lillian Foster, I know we have not known each other long, and I know you came west expecting a whole different kind of life. But I love you with everything I am, and I promise I will spend every single day making you happy if you will just do me the honor of becoming my wife. Tears just spilled down Lillian's cheeks as she looked down at this wonderful man who had changed her life in more ways than she could count. Yes, she whispered, and then a little louder. Yes, Luke Garrett, I will marry you. Pure joy lit up Luke's face as he slipped the ring right onto her finger, then got to his feet to pull her into his arms. Their kiss was soft and gentle at first. Then it deepened with the promise of all the years they would share together. When they finally pulled apart, both of them breathless, Luke rested his forehead against hers. You know, I had a whole speech all prepared about how I would understand if you needed more time, he admitted with a soft chuckle. I am mighty glad I did not need it. I do not need more time, Lillian said, her voice firm. I know exactly what I want. And it is you. It is this life we have started to build right here together. They walked back to the celebration hand in hand, with Lillian's new ring catching the light from the lanterns. The news of their engagement spread through the crowd like wildfire, bringing congratulations and good wishes from every which way. Lydia was just beside herself with joy, hugging Lillian tight and declaring that she had always wanted a sister. As the evening drew to a close, the whole sky just lit up with fireworks, brilliant bursts of colors and lights that made all the townsfolk gasp with delight. Luke stood right behind Lillian, with his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her head as they watched the show. When I first came out west, I figured I was coming to marry a stranger, Lillian said, leaning back against his strong chest. I never in my wildest dreams thought I would find a love like this one. Well, sometimes the best things in life are the ones you never planned on, Luke said softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. Like a pretty lady from back east getting left at the train station. Lillian turned in his arms to look right at him, her heart so full of love it felt like it might just burst. I was not left, she corrected him gently. I was just waiting for you, and even though I did not know it at the time. Up above, the fireworks hit their big, spectacular finale, lighting up their faces as they sealed their future with a kiss. Two souls who had found each other against all odds, right here in the wild, wide-open beauty of the Montana Territory. Epilogue. 1 year later, the Double Circle Ranch was all gussied up for the occasion. Lanterns were hung from the porch rafters and the trees around the yard, casting a warm glow on everyone gathered there. Tables just loaded down with food stretched out across the lawn, and a little platform had been set up for dancing. Inside the house, in what was now their bedroom, Lillian was putting the final touches on her getup. A brand new dress made of deep blue silk, her hair put up real pretty with a few curls framing her face. That past year had changed her in little ways. Her skin had a healthy tan from her days spent outside, and she moved with the easy confidence of a woman who knew right where she belonged. A soft knock on the door was followed by Lydia's voice. Everyone's waiting on you, Lil. Are you ready? Just about, Lillian called back, smoothing her skirt one last time before she opened the door. Lydia's whole face just lit up when she saw her. Oh, you look beautiful, she said, bouncing the little baby in her arms. Doesn't your Aunt Lillian look pretty, Sarah? The baby gurgled like she agreed with her whole heart, reaching out her chubby little hands toward Lillian, who just laughed and took her niece into her arms. Well, hello there, precious girl. Are you enjoying your very first party? Oh, she's enjoying being the center of attention, Lydia said. Riley sure takes after her uncle that way. The two of them headed on down the stairs and made their way through the house, which had gotten a whole lot bigger these past few months, with a bigger kitchen and a proper dining room. Outside, folks were mingling in the warm June evening. There were neighbors, friends from town, and all the ranch hands with their families. Lillian's eyes found Luke right away, standing tall and handsome in his Sunday best, talking with James Thornton and young Tommy, who'd shot up a few inches this past year and was looking more like a man than a boy. The second Luke saw her, he excused himself and came right over, his eyes just full of love and pride. "Well, there's my beautiful wife," he said, leaning in to give her a soft kiss. "And my favorite niece," Lydia added, tickling Sarah's little chin. "She's your only niece," Lydia reminded him, taking her daughter back. "For now, anyway." Luke's eyes went right back to Lillian, with a question in them that made her face turn a little red. They had been hoping for a baby of their own, but so far, the good Lord hadn't seen fit. "All in good time," she whispered, just for his ears to hear. This whole party was for their first wedding anniversary. They'd gotten hitched just 3 weeks after Luke had asked her, in a simple little ceremony at the Promise Creek Church, with a small get-together back at the ranch. This past year had been all about settling in and growing, learning how to be husband and wife, and building up the ranch operations, and really becoming a true part of the community. Now, Howard Sinclair, he'd been convicted of conspiracy and trying to destroy property, and got himself 5 years in the territorial prison. As for Laura, she left Promise Creek not long after her daddy was convicted, heading for San Francisco, where she had some family. The bank ended up getting bought by some investors from Helena, but James Thornton stayed on to manage the Promise Creek branch when he wasn't busy keeping the Double Circles books. As the evening went on, Lillian moved through all their guests, accepting well wishes and congratulations. You could see how well the ranch was doing just by looking at all the good food, the fine furniture, and just the happy feel of the whole place. Good feeling that filled the whole gathering. That silver mine Sinclair had his eye on had sure enough turned out to be a gold mine, but Luke had worked out a smart deal with the mining company that kept the creek clean and the grazing land safe, while still letting them pull out that valuable silver. After supper, Luke got everyone's attention, standing on a little wooden stage with Lillian right there beside him. "1 year ago today," he started, his voice ringing out clear across the yard, "I made the best choice of my entire life when I married this wonderful woman." He smiled down at Lillian. "Now, some of y'all know we met in a mighty peculiar situation. A mail-order bride left at the station, and a cowboy who said, 'You've been waiting for me.'" A friendly chuckle went through the crowd. "What I did not know then," Luke went on, "was just how true those words would turn out to be for our life together. Every single day with Lillian just proves what my heart knew in that first moment, that she was the one I had been waiting for, even when I did not know I was waiting at all." Lillian blinked back happy tears as Luke turned to look right at her. "This past year has brought me more joy than I ever thought was possible," he said, his voice getting soft. "And I want to thank you, Lillian, for taking a big chance on a stubborn old rancher who had nearly forgotten how to even hope for happiness." She could not speak past the lump in her throat, so Lillian stood on her tiptoes to kiss him, which brought a round of cheers and clapping from their guests. When they parted, she finally found her voice. "When I came out west," she said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I thought I was coming to marry a complete stranger. Instead, I found a man who has become my very best friend, my partner, and the love of my life." She smiled up at Luke. "Thank you for being in there when I needed you the most, and for every single day since." As the band started to play, Luke led Lillian in the very first dance, holding her close as they swayed across the wooden floor. Other couples soon joined them on the floor, and the party went on late into the night, filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of good friends. Much later, after the last of the guests had headed home and the house was finally quiet, Luke and Lillian stood together on the porch, looking out at the land bathed in moonlight that had become the kingdom they built together. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Garrett," Luke whispered, wrapping his strong arms around her from behind. "Happy anniversary, Mr. Garrett," Lillian answered, just leaning right back against his chest. After a moment, she turned around to face him, a little secret playing on her lips. "I've got a gift for you, darling. One I couldn't give you with all our guests around." Luke raised an eyebrow. Luke raised his own. "Well now, is that a fact?" Lillian took his hand and gently placed it right on her belly, which was still perfectly flat. "We're going to have a baby," she whispered, "in about 7 months, if the doctor's counting right," she said. Luke's whole face changed from pure surprise to wonder and then to just absolute joy, all in the span of a single heartbeat. A baby, he said again, his voice thick with emotion. Our baby. He pulled her in close, his kiss saying all the things in thankfulness that words just could not. When they finally pulled apart, they were both smiling through happy tears. I love you, Lily and Garrett, Luke said, his voice soft. More than I ever dreamed was possible. And I love you, she answered back, my cowboy who waited just for me. Hand in hand, they walked back inside to the home they had truly built with each other. And not just the house made of wood and stone, but that deeper home built on shared dreams, a whole lot of respect, and a love that was built to last. Outside, the big Montana night sky stretched out, so vast and beautiful all around them, a perfect backdrop for the life they would keep on building, day by day and year by year, always together.